Hello and welcome to our first interview series here at It's Time, talking about loss. Today we're speaking with Sam, who has a slightly different perspective from some of our guests so far. Whilst he too was a young adult when he experienced the loss of a parent, he's now a little older, which no doubt offers a fresh perspective on these circumstances. Thank you so much for joining us today and agreeing to share some of your experiences, Sam. To kick things off, it'd be great if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're up to in life at the moment.
Sure. My name is Sam Sloma. I am firstly a husband, a father of three daughters. I am a chartered financial planner, and I'm the managing director of my own business, which is called Engage Financial Services. I run a podcast called the Engaging People Podcast, where we talk to people about their businesses and their experiences and what they do. I lost my dad when I was 15, a few days after my 15th birthday. And yeah, that's probably the crux of what you need to know.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Sam. And first of all, I think as I mentioned at the start, obviously you're a little bit slightly older anyway than some of the people that have been on the podcast so far. So we've had a lot of people my age and in their 20s and early 20s that have experienced loss of a parent and things that are quite raw. Obviously, this is something that's happened to you a little further back in your life. Is it possible for you just to go into a bit more detail about what happened when you were 15 years old with the loss of your father and just outline that experience itself?
Sure. So my dad died of cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer a few years before. So when I was 12 or 13, I actually can't remember when it was first diagnosed. I had an operation, came back to sort of full health and fitness, and was in good shape. And then the recurrence of the cancer came back and was, eventually caused his death. He was 46 at the time, I believe. I've got two older sisters who are slightly, 19 and 21. One was at university at the time. And I think one was living locally, but in her own place. So I was at home with mum. I mean, that was sort of the background of it. Obviously, it's still, interesting to hear different perspectives on it. It's not raw now, obviously. A lot of time's gone by. It's coming up to 25 years. But it's still, it's still sad. There's different stages you go through when your life changes and you get married and you have children, and you think about all the things that, they've missed out on, and you've missed out on, the shared experiences with, a parent. It's still sad, and it still hurts, and it still, brings up emotions. It's maybe not as, like you said, as raw and as forefront of the mind as it was, when I was young at that time. So I think I look back, I'm lucky that I had a really supportive family, a wider family, cousins, aunties, uncles. My thoughts now on it, really, it's sort of, it's a bit mixed. It's a bit of a blur. So there's certain things I remember that are clear as day, and there's certain memories that are just, I think I've either blocked away or I've just pushed down, and will only experience if I want to go really deep into that period and understand what happened at the time. So I think that stuff hasn't changed. That there was always bits I remember that are vivid, and the rest is just memories and feelings of happy childhood and great relationship with my dad, and things that we used to do, and the normal things that a lucky guy growing up with a full family goes through, until it changes.
Absolutely, yeah. You said there you had a very happy childhood, and it's something that obviously you still look back on with really fond memories, which is really great to hear. What was your dad like as a person? Could you give us a bit of a sense of his character and perhaps what he was like as a father growing up?
Yeah, I will. Actually, that's a really good question. One of the things that I reflected on, or I reflect on quite regularly, is that at 15, I didn't really get to know him as an adult. So I wasn't an adult when he passed, and obviously, there's only certain things that you would come to learn when you're an adult. So how they see the world, what their views are on, you know, politics, or whatever it is, loads of different things. Now I remember him as a dad, and he was super fun. He also had his own business. He worked hard, but we went on. He loved going away. We had lots of holidays. He loved running. He loved sport, so we used to do a lot of water sport together. He played the guitar. He was terrible. His friends used to call him a nutty professor, because in our house we had a garage that was basically full of stuff that he was building or creating, or and some of the stuff I've inherited and some of it I haven't, so I can't build anything. Literally rubbish, rubbish around the house, useless at DIY, whereas he did everything. But I'm a half decent runner, half decent at most sports, which we used to do together. So I think there's two aspects. One is that, like I said, their memories now and their feelings of being loved and supported, and having a happy childhood. But there's also the feeling that I didn't get to know him as well as I know my mum, who, thankfully is still healthy and alive, and I know well, and I know my mum well. So I know, what would my mum say if something happened, or I know what she's going to say. Whereas I think, I probably didn't get that from my dad, because the things you talk about, up to 14 and 15 are kids' things. So, I knew that he wanted us to work hard in school. I knew that he had his own business. I knew that he loved cars. But the superficial things, the deeper stuff, I think you only can learn as you're an adult, and go through that life together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hear so much about, from certainly from the people we're speaking to so far and people within the charity as a whole, in terms of that process of learning to live with a lot of these facts about not potentially knowing certain things about your father's life or anyone else's parents' life, for these reasons. How have you managed to deal with the loss of your dad over time? How has that changed, do you think, as you've matured, as you've got a family of your own? Yeah, and just how has that really developed as you've become a grown adult, really?
Okay, so there's a fair bit in there. I mean, the first thing is, I'd always framed in my head that I was quite lucky. I had 15 years with my dad, so I did know him. Um, we had a lot of time together, so it wasn't like I felt that I never saw him. He was around. He did holidays. He came to my football matches. We did spend a lot of time together, and we were close. So I was able to frame things that I was in some ways lucky. There's people in a lot worse situations than I was. Um, so that's how I've generally dealt with things going forward. That I have happy memories, and I know that I was loved. So there's nothing left to say. There was never any anger. I was never angry. I was sad, but I was able to be a little bit circumspect that these things do happen to people. It's unfortunate, and you don't want it to happen to you, but it does happen. I think it's allowed me to understand how resilient people are and children are. Um, it's made me very aware of my own mortality, which has pros and cons. Also with my children, it's framed a lot of how I want to live. So I want to make sure I've got loads of time with them, spend time so they know who I am, so that if something were to happen to me, again, hopefully it doesn't, but they know who I was. I do certain things. I write them emails now that they won't access till they're older, so that if anything happened, they've got some stuff from me that they can read. And yeah, it frames. It's a frame running through your life. I think it never goes away, obviously, but you learn to have, I want to say, coping mechanisms, because I don't think it's something, like I said, that I think about daily, but it's always there in the background. There's always things that are reminders. I wear a watch that he wore. So I always, have that on every day or most days. Yeah, there's always small reminders of childhood, and the sadness of not seeing them with their grandkids, or at the weddings and those kind of things. But it it could be worse. Having children, you want to make sure that they're happy and healthy, and that it sort of changes the focus a bit.
Definitely, yeah. And I know you've mentioned a couple of times there about things that you do now that you've learned from those experiences, and the fact that you keep sentimental things that your father had, such as the watch, for example. Um, do you think there's certain things that may have come out of the loss of your dad that could be seen as a positive? So things that you have made you a better person on the back of it? Have you become closer to your family? Have you been able to put yourself in a position to motivate yourself in your career? Is there certain things you could try and frame in a positive way that perhaps people could take some level of optimism from?
Yeah, so good question again. I think the things that I've taken from it are um, that it definitely changed me. I was a spoiled kid. Um, that I was a nice kid. I wasn't horrible, but I was spoiled and I was selfish, and it allowed me to see the world in a different way and understand that it wasn't all about me. Um, and it definitely changed me as a person. I think that the biggest thing that it's given me is the ability to understand um, sadness and that people go through things, and to have a bit more empathy for other people, and to tell a story that is personal to me, that happens to a lot of people, but it resonates because people understand it, and you can talk about these things and be able to be open with other people. And the work that I do, there is elements of work around death and work around insurance and work around other bits that sort of intertwine. And I think that the experiences that I've had and have taken with me have stood me in good stead for that. Now, my mum used to say to me when I was young that there was a lot of study that children who lose a parent go on to be very successful. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, or it's just something that she told me, but for some reason, it gave me some sort of confidence to go on and do well. I think there's a motivation behind it that I haven't got a massive safety net. So whether I did or not previously, I don't know. But I needed to go and work. I needed to go and generate. I needed to go and look after my family. I wanted my family to have the things that I had growing up. And it definitely gave me a hunger and a desire. I think I had that stuff already, but you don't know. So it's sort of not, it's easy to reflect with 2020 hindsight, but it, there are definitely positives to take away. It's not a positive in the whole, but there's definitely things you can take away from it that help you grow as a person for sure.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think that's a way, as a charity, we've spent a lot of time trying to frame a lot of these things in a way that people can see positives to come out of it, especially when there's people are going through the very toughest part of grief. So it's good to hear from someone who has gone on to be a success story, and to some extent, whether that's something you would call yourself or not, but you are a success story in the fact that you've come out of this and you are where you are today. In terms of when this happened at the time, so obviously now you run a podcast and you're someone who talks a lot about things by the sounds of it. How did you find talking at the time, and was it something that was a useful tool for you?
I don't think I did talk a lot at the time, to be honest. I don't think I spoke in detail about it. I never had any counselling, and you'd have to ask my mum or my sisters, but I think they were a little bit worried about how I internalized things. So now I've got older and it's easier to talk about for me. I think it's easy to say that I'm a good talker now. My communication skills are quite good. Back then, I don't think they were as good. I just needed to process stuff myself. I can get like that now. Sometimes I need time to think. I need time to be on my own to process what's going on and what it means. One of the biggest things to come out of it, actually going back to the previous question, is nothing is ever that bad anymore. So the worst thing is that someone passes away. So if things are bad at work, or if things are, it's never that bad. And it drives my wife mad because, she's stressing about something or the other. And I'm like, well, it's not that bad. It reframes how bad things are in your life, because, unless someone is unhealthy or unwell, things are could always be worse. So it's allowed me to have a good framing mechanism. But from a talking perspective, no, I don't think I was a good talker. I don't think I spoke about it in detail for quite a long time. Um, and that's not because it was a stigma or because I was embarrassed. It was just my way of dealing with it. Yeah, there's a few. I remember my wife and I, when we were first getting together, which was a long time ago, 2 or 3 years after. I remember us talking about it in detail. That was the first time I think I'd opened up to her, or really to anyone, at that point. So yeah, that is the thing. I'm not one of those to go talking about it with everyone who'll listen. It was my own way of dealing things. So as I've got older, it's easier to talk about. Obviously, there's more distance, more time, more thought gone into what happened and how that process was and went. Yeah, so it's with experience and age, it gets easier.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, part of me thinks when you're saying that, I think obviously you're a young lad, um, 20 or so years ago, and I guess nowadays um, there's a lot of talk about young men and speaking out and being able to voice their emotions in probably a way that there wasn't 20 years ago. Do you think there was any
Yeah.
there's any truth in that having an impact on perhaps why you kept things inward rather than expressing your emotions?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I think the world, like you said, has changed quite a lot in that period. Um, it's much more spoken about generally these days. There is a lot of emphasis on, you know, men opening up and young men opening up. There's a lot more emphasis on counselling. It's not got the stigma it had. Coaching, people helping and guiding. All of that stuff is a real positive in society over the past 20 years. I'm sure there is some. I'm sure there is some, what's the word I'm looking for, connection between those two. But, there's nothing I can do about that. Would I have done it if it was around more at the time? Maybe, probably, don't know. I might have just said, this is not for me. I still need to internalize it myself and deal with it in my own way. But yeah, I don't dwell on that because I can't do anything about it.
No, of course. And just on the back of that, I mean, we've kind of set ourselves up as a charity to try and um, make the world a better place for people who are in that young adult period of their life and are going through this as an experience. Is there anything that comes to mind that you would love to see us do that you think would have helped a younger version of Sam back in the day, or someone else right now that might be going through that you think it'd be a really helpful thing that we could do as an organization?
Firstly, I think that obviously what you're doing is great. I think the more of these opportunities, options for people to speak to or to reach out to, the better. I remember, back then, lots of people wrote me letters talking about experiences or memories of my dad and their condolences, and I've still got them somewhere. And I liked reading those and hearing some people had similar experiences. So I like the sharing element. No, the only thing I would say is to be visible, to make sure that you're visible for people. They know where they can find you. Obviously, that's difficult because getting reach and stuff, but with social media these days, it's easier. And provide people the way to do it in the option of the way to do it in the way they want to, if that makes sense. So I might have spoken to someone if I had the opportunity, but I would have wanted it done on my terms rather than on your terms, if that makes sense. So I think that's the only thing is sort of make yourselves available to speak to people in the place or in the way that they're comfortable to do it. Because the more comfortable you can make someone, the more opportunity you're going to have to speak to them and to help and to provide benefits to them. So no barriers to entry, make it as accessible as possible, because that way you've got more more options for people to get in touch with you. That's the only thing I can think of that might be of any use.
No, definitely, that's really helpful, and it is something that we are trying to stress that that these circumstances are unique for everyone, and everyone there isn't a right way of dealing with the loss of a parent, and there isn't the right way of getting through that process. So that is important, I think. And I think that's really useful advice. Before we finish up, firstly, it's been really great to talk to you, and I really appreciate you kind of turning back the clock a little bit and thinking about things that are obviously still a very difficult thing to talk about. Is there anything you could give as a piece of advice for a younger person who this is far more raw, and you've potentially just gone through or going through a very similar experience that you did as a 15-year-old, that you feel might be able to help them, or just a piece of advice that may just make that process a little easier for them?
As you said, it's all down to the individual and what's happened to them, the circumstances, the background. There's so many things at play that make everything individual for the person. What I will say is that it does get easier. Um, Time is a great healer. I mean, all the classic phrases that people will hear that at the time you don't want to hear, they're true and they're around because it's the truth, and people have seen it before. So time is definitely a great healer. I think difficult things blur into the background, and what you're left with are the positive memories, which is quite nice. I found that myself, that you don't look back and remember any bad things. You generally look back through rose tinted glasses, which is great because it's a nice way to be. um, I would also advise people to not shut themselves off. So make sure that they are thinking that there are people supporting them, even if they don't want them. Know that they're there. Know that there are people that they can speak to. They can reach out. To just be open-minded to different types and avenues. If you think it might help, try it. If it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. And those three are the top tips I could give, just off the cuff.
Three brilliant tips, I think, Sam. Thank you very much for speaking with me today. And again, much like the other interviews, hopefully this is a help to someone out there, and someone can learn something from your own experiences in our conversation today. So thank you again, and good luck with the podcast and the business.
Yeah, no worries. Listen, if you want to give my details out, anyone wants to reach out, happy to chat. Yeah, with pleasure. If I can provide any help or wisdom, or something that can be useful, please do feel free to get in touch.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam.